All right, welcome back to another great episode here at Gospel Goldmine. Today we are covering 1 Nephi chapter 16 through 22. I am labeling this From Desert to Destiny. We got a lot of great stuff to cover today. I'm going to try to move as quickly as possible. We got a lot of stuff. I think you're going to like what we have today. We have a lot of geography, and we're going to go through our typical stuff: themes, outline, form criticism, Jungian archetypes. Got to have those. Textual criticism, literary criticism, forms and processes and fulfillment, and specific insights and applications. So today there's a lot of geography stuff, probably some of the stuff that gives some of the strongest evidence for the Book of Mormon's Old World geography, which we're going to cover here today. So this is a painting I'd never seen before. This is of them arriving at Bountiful after being in the barren wasteland desert. You can see them bowing down, praising God. A really cool photo I'd never seen before, or a painting I'd never seen before. This is a photo of what might be where the land of Bountiful actually is. So I'm just going to jump right in because there is a ton to cover here. I'm going to try to move quickly. But yeah, I got a couple videos to catch up on. I know this video is a little bit late, but we'll get caught up here in the next couple weeks. So context, the W questions: who, when, where, why, right? Who, Nephi's family, when from 600 to 570 BC. This covers a long range. They were in the desert, it says, from 8 years. So we know that they left about 600 years from the time that Jerusalem was destroyed, roughly, or shortly before Jerusalem was destroyed. So roughly 600 BC, and then 8 years in the wilderness, and then it covers until they said 30 years from the time they left Jerusalem, right? So where's in the wilderness? There is a lot to cover here. When they started, they went from Jerusalem to the borders of the Red Sea to the Valley of Lemuel. This is kind of where they left. And then what happened was then they took Nephi had his visions that we just talked about last week. And then they continued their journey south. And then they camped here in Shazer, and then come down further. This is kind of what's described in 1 Nephi chapter 16. Valley of Lemuel, Shazer, and they go down from the most fertile parts to the more fertile parts is what it talks about in 1 Nephi chapter 16. Then there's the camp of the broken bow, which we'll talk about here in a second. There's Nahom, very important. And then they land they go due east, and they land in the place that they call Bountiful. So we're going to talk about all these places, potential locations where they might actually be. We've talked about the Valley of Lemuel before. This is Wadi Tayyib al-Asim. Matches the description of the Valley of Lemuel with the rivers and the valley, and I think some like fruit, something like that. Then they go to the Valley of Shazer. Now, Shazer there's an Arabic word that's pronounced Shazer. It's transliterated more like this, Shazer, but it's pronounced Shazer. It means clump of trees. So naturally, they would be in a place next to trees where there'd be water. That would be a logical place for them to set up camp. I'm not saying this is exactly the same thing, but it's possible. There's some connection there, right? Then, as far as where that's located, we don't know exactly, of course, but we think it could be this place called Wadi Sharma. You can see some pictures here. This is perhaps where Shazer is. And we're going to show that here. This is perhaps where Shazer is, right? And then it goes for the most fertile parts, right? This is kind of maybe the clump of trees, I don't know. And then to the more fertile parts where in basically implying that there's a decrease in fertility as they keep going further south, which is consistent with what we see geographically, right? And then there's the camp of the broken bow, which we'll talk about as well. Now, I would highly recommend you take a look at this video right here. I'll put it in the link in the description, as well as this one right here. It talks about Nahom. This one talks about Old World geography in general. That's awesome. This one talks about Nahom specifically. I recommend those so you can get a bigger thing. But I'm just going to go through this real quick. So Camp of the Broken Bow, we think it's maybe near this place called Bishah. So you can see here, right here, or right here, right? And then basically there'd be a place where there'd be some olive trees where he can actually make those bows, right? And then Nahom, right? This is where they buried Ishmael, right? And what's interesting is Nahom, like a Hebrew word Naham, which is close to it, means morning. And this area right here, where Nahom, we suspect it is one of the largest burial areas in Southwest Arabia anciently, right? So it would make sense that they would bury Ishmael there, right? Also, what's interesting about Nahom is that in Hebrew, they don't have vowels, right? So in this case, there would be no A or O, it should be NHM. What's interesting is right where we would expect to find Nahom according to Nephi's description is where we find this place that was this altar that was found in 1997, where it literally says NHM in Hebrew, NHM, corresponding to Nahom. Again, corresponding to it meaning a place of mourning where they could bury him. So very interesting. There's a lot more to this. I recommend you checking out this video. Okay, so we'll keep going here. Beyond that, they went due east and landed in Bountiful. The only place that matches Nephi's description. I mean, this is a barren wasteland, right? But when they talk about Bountiful, it says it's lush, it's green, it's got honey, it's got ore, it's got a mountain. There's a place that's found that matches that quite perfectly. This place called Korkefot. Okay, and you can see that right here. There's more videos on this again on this video here. But yeah, it matches the description perfectly. Now, I don't know how Joe Smith would have figured that out, but it's very interesting. Okay. Now, some more maps. Now, as far as the oceanic path, we don't know what they did. There are different models that were proposed. I'm going to propose the two biggest ones. There's the Heartland model and there's the Mesoamerican model. According to the Heartland model, they would have gone around the coast of Africa and into America, landing in the Gulf of Mexico into Florida. That's according to the Heartland model. The Mesoamerican model, opposite direction. They would have gone around India through these islands in Indonesia, and then would have landed on the Pacific coast of Central America or Mesoamerica, right? So I'll let you decide what you believe. Those are the different models, okay? Now, intent message, you can kind of look at these: faith, obedience, miracles, prophecy, spiritual lessons, and so on, right? These are some other themes: faith, obedience, divine protection, revelation, promises, leadership, right? You can read through that, okay? Now, I want to go through the outline really quickly. So first Nephi chapter 16, there's miracles in the desert. They rebuke. The family finds the Liahona, right? They're guided by the Liahona through the desert. They make a new bow. I talked about all that. The Liahona works by faith. It's not actually named the Liahona here, but it's labeled that later. Ishmael dies, family mourns, rebels, and they reconcile. Okay. Then Nephi's commanded to build a ship. They arrive in Bountiful after 8 years of travel, find fruit and honey. God commands Nephi to build a ship, and then his brothers make fun of him for that. And so Nephi, what's interesting here is, instead of rebuking him, or I guess he did rebuke him, but after kind of rebuking them, he tells stories about Israel, right? He tells stories about the Exodus. So he's trying to rebuild their faith, and so he turns to the scriptures and says, hey, look, if God can deliver Moses captive from Egypt, then why can't he help us build a ship, right? So another great way to build faith is to look at powerful, miraculous experiences in the scriptures or in your own life or other people's lives. And that's a great way of building faith. Okay. Brothers rebuke him, right? He's filled with the power of God. Okay. Then they actually get on the ship, right? They finish it. They jump, they get in, they load up the ship. They rebel, they party, they tie up Nephi. Nephi rebukes them, ties them up. They tie him up, and then the storm arises. And then once they let him go, then the storm ceases and they land in the promised land. Interesting though, Nephi is praising God throughout the entire time. He believes that this affliction will be for his gain. And so that's kind of another insight there, right? The storm, if Nephi was cursing God the entire time, the storm probably wouldn't have stopped when he was let loose, right? But because he was praising God, right? And he never let his guard down, never let his faith down, they allowed for a miracle to take place, right? So another little insight there, okay? Chapter 19. Nephi again talks about the plates, 2 sets of plates, describes the future of the Jews, prophecies of Christ, and desires to persuade men to believe in Christ, right? Pretty straightforward. There's something that's very, very important here, though, is in 1 Nephi chapter 19, verses 23 and 24. He says that he read from the books of Moses and from Isaiah, and he likened all scriptures unto them that might be for their profit and learning. Okay, and they talked about the remnant of the house of Israel, which again, here is most likely talking about the Lamanites, right? Him and his posterity is the remnant of the house of Israel. They're from Joseph, Ephraim and Manasseh. I believe he is from Ephraim and Ishmael's from Manasseh, maybe the other way around. I can't remember. But which is Joseph, which is the son of Jacob, whose name was turned to Israel, right? Who's the son of Isaac, who's the son of Abraham, right? So he says, we're a remnant. And then he interprets in 1 Nephi 20 and 1 Nephi 21, he quotes Isaiah 48, 49. And then chapter 22, chapter 20 and 21, these are Isaiah chapters. And then 22, he interprets the verses that he just read, right, from Isaiah, okay? So this is very important. I want to explain why here in a second. So keep in mind the context. Isaiah is written in 700 BC, something like that, before the Babylonian exile. The Babylonian exile is in 586 BC, right? So keep these timelines in place. Nephi leaves in 600 BC before the Babylonian exile, gets on the ship about 592 BC. In the meantime, what he's probably doing, and I talked about this here, I'll come back here. In the meantime, right, he's probably reading the scriptures of Isaiah because he just had this vision. They camped in Shazer, or they camped just north of Shazer, right, on the borders of the Red Sea. Let's see if I can come back here. They camped right here, the Valley of Lemuel. And then Nephi has his vision, and then they continue to go further south. Now, as they're going south, he is probably referring to the brass plates that they have. He reads the books of Moses and Isaiah, right? And he's trying to make sense of the vision that he just had, right? And so the vision that he just had shows a promise of, we talked about in the last video, it shows a promise of the Gentiles in the way that he's interpreting that as the Latter-day Saints, bringing the Book of Mormon, bringing the fullness of the gospel to the seed of his brethren, which are the American Indians, the Lamanites, right? Or, whoever the posterity of the Lamanites are. That's who he sees as the Gentiles and of the remnant of the house of Israel. That's what he's thinking, because he just saw that vision. So now when he's traveling down here, he reads the book of Isaiah, and he's like, whoa, this is talking about the vision that I had. In reality, it's probably not the same thing. And let me explain here, okay? But he's trying to make meaning of it, okay? And so he sees that. Give me 1 second here. So let's go back to this outline here. Let me explain my reasoning here, okay? So first Nephi chapter 20 and 21, he quotes Isaiah, and then he gives his exegesis, or his explanation of what he interprets that to mean. The Gentiles' role in the gospel's restoration and the destruction of the wicked, the final judgment, whatever. And then the scattering of gathering of Israel. And he's talking about this in relation to his own family line, right? Now, if you read Isaiah in isolation, it's not probably talking about that. It's talking about Babylon and the return from Babylon. 586 BC, Babylonians overcome Judah. They take them captive into Babylon, 586, right? Then what happens about 40 years later, Cyrus, the king of Persia, comes and overtakes Babylon and allows the Jews to return back to their mainland of Judah, right? About 40 years later, okay? So that's what Isaiah's prophecy is talking about. You can see here, it talks about Israel's enemies will be defeated, and the promises and expansion of the Gentile nations will assist in Israel's return. So, Israel's enemies, who's that talking about? Babylon. They'll be defeated. God will protect his people. And this will happen through the Gentile nations. Who is that talking about? That's probably talking about the Persians, right? Because they overcame Babylon and allowed the Jews to return to their native land, right? That's what Isaiah is talking about. But again, this had not happened when Nephi had this vision, when Nephi had this trip. And so he didn't have that context. So he's seeing Isaiah through his own eyes, and he's likening the scriptures to himself, as demonstrated here, and saying, hey, this is how I apply Isaiah's words to my own vision, to my own life. That is my argument. I think it makes sense. I would love for somebody to poke holes in that, but let me know your thoughts, okay? So that's kind of the idea here in 2021 of, liberation from God promises liberation from Babylon, and that'll happen through the Gentiles, meaning the Persians, okay? Cool. I know I kind of repeated myself a few times, but I wanted to make sure that was clear. Okay, now, form criticism. I've talked about this before. There's biblical form criticism. It talks about, analyzing a text through the form that it came through. That can be parables, hymns, prophetic oracles, narratives, laws, legends, myths, prayers, psalms, wisdom literature, etc., right? So if we get through each chapter, first Nephi 16, 17, 18, and 19 are all narratives, and it's to teach about divine guidance, faith in action, consequences of rebellion, and so forth, right? And prophecies of Christ, right? Then 20 and 21, these are Isaiah chapters. This is prophetic oracles that show the relevance of Isaiah's prophecies to Nephi's family and foreshadows Christ's role in the gathering of Israel. Okay. Chapter 2 is an exegesis, which is basically an interpretation of these two chapters. And again, he's reading these two chapters through the lens of the vision that he just had before, right? Eschatological prophecy. So he interprets Isaiah through that lens. Okay. Now, let's talk about Jungian archetypes. Again, I've talked about this in other videos. Carl Jung, famous psychologist, had some fantastic things. He finds archetypes that are found throughout all different religions and sees what are common threads. These are all common threads found in different religions across the world, right? And I've talked about that before. These are also different archetypes that are found within good stories. And so here are some of the things that you'll find. Nephi is a hero, right? He embarks on a journey, faces trials, overcome obstacles, and achieves great tasks. There's a mentor. Lehi serves the mentor. The mother, Sariah, obviously literally is his mother, but also as our mother archetype symbolizes nurturance, care, and concern for her family's well-being. There's a shadow, which represents kind of the darker side of human nature. Lemuel can be seen as embodiments of that. Trickster, that's another Jungian archetype. You can see that with the trials and things that they have, right? But the thing I want to focus on here is the journey, okay? So now a journey archetype is very important, and usually a hero is involved, right? So you heard about the hero's journey, right? And here are the things that you'll see. And this is, if you look at Nephi's journey, it matches perfectly with the Jungian archetype of the journey. There's self-discovery, personal development, transformation, departure from the familiar, trials and challenges, tests, return or arrival, growth and understanding. So initiated when they're commanded to leave Jerusalem. Then they actually leave Jerusalem. That's crossing the threshold. These things in bold are elements of the Jungian archetype of journey. Okay. There's challenges and obstacles. We see that, the hunger, the broken bow. They need to build a ship. There's internal conflict. There's spiritual tests, whatever, right? But throughout the process, another part of a Jungian archetype is supernatural aid. Obviously, that's very apparent. They have the Leahona. They have Nephi praying for guidance, and when they get to the land of Bountiful, there's divine counsel given, and they act on it, and they receive aid because of that, right? Then there's the transformation and return, apotheosis, which is another word for climax. They actually build a ship, make it through the ocean to the promised land, and then they actually arrive in the promised land. Sometimes there's a return in an archetype. In this case, there's an actual arrival. And so although there's not an actual return, it signifies the completion of the journey. So you can absolutely see how Nephi's journey fits perfectly with the Jungian archetype of the journey. That was very interesting. Okay. Literary criticism. So this is another biblical discipline. You'll look at different stylistic devices, narrative structures, motifs found within the literature itself. One thing that I want to point out as it relates to these chapters is parallelism. There are different types of parallelism: synonymous, antithetic, synthetic, climactic, and chiastic. You probably heard of chiasmus. Antithetic is basically, you can kind of go through this, but it's basically, when it shows one thing and the opposite. A wise son brings joy to his father, but a foolish son brings grief to his mother. Synonymous is saying the same thing in a different way. Kind of the heavens declare the glory of God, skies proclaim the work of his hands, right? The purpose of these is for aesthetic pleasure, memorization, emphasis, clarification, right? But one that you find here is repeated alternate parallelism, which in this case is a form of synthetic parallelism, where you kind of see an A-B structure, and it builds on each other. So in this example, in 1 Nephi, chapter 19, verse 10, what you'll find is repeated Hebrewism, right? Parallelism. God of Jacob yields himself. This is basically Christ's actions, or what happened to Christ, and then who it's according to. God yields himself, according to the words of the angel, as a man to the wicked man, according to the words of Zena, and to be crucified, according to the words of Nehom, and to be buried in sepulchre, according to the words of Zena. So Christ's action, or what happens to him, according to who it is. A-B. Very interesting, okay? Textual criticism. I've talked about this before. It talks about different basically different manuscripts and the textual changes between manuscripts. That's something you find in biblical literature or biblical studies, and also compares different versions over time. So in the case of the Book of Mormon, we have all these different versions from the original manuscript all the way to the 2013 edition. You can see all these here. Original manuscript, printed manuscript, 1830, right? And as you go through this, what you'll find is Nephi's Isaiah versus the King James Version Isaiah. You can compare them. So in 1 Nephi chapter 20, verses 48, you can see all the little textual differences. There's just little things here and there, nothing huge, but it does add some clarification. But what I want to point out mostly here is the waters of baptism. So in 1 Nephi chapter 20, verse 1, the original manuscript does not have anything that talks about the waters of baptism. And the same thing in Isaiah. It does not talk about the waters of baptism, right? But later in the 1840 edition, see, I'll show you here, waters of Judah. So this is the original manuscript. Nothing there about waters of baptism. Then in the 1840 edition, you can see that this was added, or out of the waters of baptism. So what is this? This is basically a clarification from Joseph Smith in 1840 to give added clarification of what the waters of Judah is referring to, okay? It's not in Isaiah, it's not in the original manuscript, but it's in the 1840 edition and everything beyond that, okay? Now, I want to talk about this because I think this is significant. I don't believe that when Isaiah is writing this, he's talking about actual baptism, okay? Baptism most likely was not a practice in Isaiah's day, right? There was the Jewish practice, I'm going to talk about this here. There was the Jewish practice of mikvah, which is a ritual purification similar to baptism, and that was found in Second Temple period Judaism, first century BC. But and this was the source of inspiration for the baptism by Christians, right? Mikvah and baptism, very similar. Yeah, this is probably where we get baptism from, is from this Jewish practice, right? But that probably wasn't practiced in Isaiah's day, because this is 100 BC, something like that. Versus Isaiah is 700 BC. They didn't practice that back then. There was always ritual purification, but not necessarily baptism or even mikvah. At least we don't have any evidence for it. Maybe there was, but we don't have evidence for it, okay? So why did Joseph Smith add the waters of baptism? Well, here's my argument, okay? I don't think that Isaiah was talking about the waters of baptism, but what the waters of Judah represents exactly what the waters of baptism represent. So Joseph is adding this clarification of what it means for us. It doesn't mean for Isaiah's reader at his time, but what for us, okay? When you think about the waters of Judah, another translation is actually the loins of Judah. I looked at this in my, there's the King James version of Isaiah, and then I have also the New Revised Standard Version, which is what scholars use, where it says the loins of Judah, okay? And I'm going to talk about that here in a second, okay? So what the waters of baptism likely represents in this particular case with Isaiah is life, blessing, lineage, purification, sustenance, covenant community, covenant blessings, identity, privileges, expectations, covenant relationship. Does that sound at all familiar? I would argue that what the waters of Judah and the waters of baptism represent is the same thing, okay? So even if you use the word loins of Judah instead of waters of Judah, think about it. Loins means birth into the community, birth into the covenant relationship, right? Baptism is literally a rebirth. And what waters of Judah in this place represent is the same thing, right? Covenant identity, community, blessings, privileges, relationship, lineage, expectations, etc. So these two waters of Judah is to Isaiah what waters of baptism is to us today. So that's why I argue why Joseph Smith added that section. It's not what Isaiah meant for his people, but it is what it means to us today. That's my argument, okay? And they mean similar things to them, okay? All right, so let's move on to prophecies and promises. I'm just going to buzz through this one really, really quickly. So there's internally fulfilled, externally fulfilled, biblically fulfilled, and unfulfilled. I talked about this last time. Biblically, internally fulfilled means it was prophesied in the Book of Mormon and fulfilled within the Book of Mormon. Biblically fulfilled means it was prophesied in the Book of Mormon, fulfilled in the Bible. Externally fulfilled means it was prophesied in the Book of Mormon and fulfilled outside of the Book of Mormon and outside of the Bible. Unfulfilled means it hasn't been fulfilled yet, right? So you can kind of see some of these things here. Nephi's going to build a ship. That's internally fulfilled, right? Restoration of the gathering of Israel. That's still in process, right? And then chapter 19, coming of Christ to earth. I apologize. My phone keeps making all these alerts here. Coming of Christ to earth. You can see these biblically fulfilled, sovereign of Christ, gathering Israel, right? These are all internally and biblically fulfilled and still being fulfilled today, okay? And then Gentiles' role in gathering of Israel. Again, that's still being played out. 1 Nephi 22. These are all in process or unfulfilled prophecies, right? So these are, gathering of Israel, the role of Gentiles in gathering of Israel, the destruction of the wicked. That's kind of a last day thing. Restoration of the gospel, right? That's kind of being internally fulfilled and externally fulfilled. It's kind of still being in the process of being fulfilled as well. Book of Mormon to come forth to the Gentiles, that's internally and externally fulfilled. The New Jerusalem, that's unfulfilled. Okay. All right. So I'm going to wrap this up with some specific insights and application. So First Nephi chapter 16 talks about the Liahona. We can use the Liahona for ourselves as a symbol of revelation. It operates on faith, diligence, and heed that we give unto it. So if we use the same principles that they use with the Liahona, that's how we're going to receive more and more revelation. Okay. The broken bow. Broken bows or bows, some people argue, were a symbol of political power. And so when Nephi broke his bow and Laman and Lemuel lost their springs, Nephi tries to fashion a new bow. And so his brothers soon accuse him of having political ambitions. Very interesting little tidbit there. Okay. First, chapter 17, verse 2, they talk about using raw meat. There's probably two reasons for this. We don't know, but we can speculate. One is we don't want to use fire because we don't want to bring any enemies or unwanted visitors. Two is to actually fight scurvy. If you use cooked meat, this is something, I think his name's James Gee or John Gee, I can't remember. You can look up Stick of Joseph on Instagram. He argues that another reason for raw meat is for the vitamin C. If you use cooked meat, then the vitamin C no longer stays. But if it's raw, then it stays. And so it fights off scurvy. They found that, I think, with Eskimos and whatnot. And so this is perhaps one reason why they ate raw meat, is so that while they're eating meat in the wilderness, they don't get scurvy. Okay. Verse 9, just another insight, is Nephi did not ask for tools. He asked for ore. This also indicates Nephi's willingness to do the work himself. Nephi recounts the Exodus story as an example. He relies on the scriptures to build faith in his brethren when they are weak in faith. Verse 36 talks about the, multiply and replenish the earth. That's the purpose of the earth. And it cross references with the other verse, I believe I think it's a DNC, where it talks about, hey, if you don't steal families together, then the whole world will be utterly wasted in its coming, right? Because the earth's purpose is to bring families together, okay? That's the purpose of its existence, okay? Verse 45, this is an important one. He talks about how you need to listen to the still small voice, but you're past feeling, and so he has spoken to you with a voice of thunder, right? So we can apply that to our own lives in the sense that if we don't listen to inspiration at the first time, usually he'll shake things up in our life and things will get worse until we start listening. Okay. Another thing, revelation happens in increments. Nephi didn't learn everything about how to build a ship all at once. It was line upon line. He did one little thing, then he got more revelation, then he acted on it, and back and forth. Cross-reference either two. Brother Jared did the same thing, right? Mountain. Nephi found a place where he could be just the Lord by himself. What we can take from that is sometimes we need to be in solitude so that we can hear the voice of the Spirit, not be distracted by other things. Okay. First Nephi 19 verse 5 talks about making records. Richard G. Scott says, we should write down our promptings, because even though the Lord can bring it to remembrance, that doesn't mean we shouldn't write it down, because that's how we remember it. Okay. I already talked about this part. This is talking about how you need to, in order to understand how Nephi used Isaiah, you need to look at it through his lens and how he's applying it to himself. And First Nephi 19 verse 23 and 24. Okay. Gentiles and Isaiah is talking about the Persians. Gentiles and Nephi is talking about the Latter-day Saints. Just so you're aware. Okay. And then last but not least, First Nephi chapter 22 verse 26, it says that Satan will be bound because of the righteousness of his people. So this signifies that perhaps Satan isn't actually bound per se, except that God's people give no place for him to tempt them. So you can build Zion, right? So how do we bind Satan ourselves? By continuing to repent and follow Jesus Christ. So that is everything for today. You have questions, please let me know in the comments. I would love to hear your thoughts. And if you like this, please give it a like, subscribe, and comment down below, and we will talk to you soon. Take care. Bye.